We're doing it. All right, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Bree. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about um, the embroidery series this year with a lot of new faces, a lot of new names. This is the first year that I'm doing this beginner class, so thank you for coming. Um, we're going to go over the super basics here. So, what I want to start with is your thread. So, in your little bag, you haven't opened everything up yet. You've got a few skeins of thread. Some of you all have at least a couple of skeins that are whole skeins. Some of you may have baby skeins, depending on your color choices. You either got like 4 of these or like 7 of these, just depends. So we're gonna start with that. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna mute everybody. Okay. You are all allowed to unmute yourselves if you have a question. Okay, so first things first. When you buy embroidery floss, it comes like this. If you're buying just at Joann's or whatever, DMC brand's really great. It's a higher quality thread, but it's not going to break the bank. There are much like more expensive threads, but this is a good one to go with. Um, if you look closely at your embroidery floss, you're going to notice 1 or 2 ends peeking out here like this. Your instinct is going to be to pull on it. Don't do it. You're most of the time it will work fine, but when it doesn't work, you end up with a huge knot and it's a big mess. So here's what I want you to do. And you don't have to do this with me because you don't have something to wrap it around, but all you need are little flap, like cardboard flaps cut like this, or you can buy these. These are plastic. They also make paper ones. Oh, sorry, everybody. I just had a weird thing happen on my screen. Get out of here. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So you have these. If you have a flap of cardboard, you just need a little bit, and all you have to do is cut like a couple of little things in it like this, okay? And you've got your skein of thread. If you want to get started with this, go ahead and do it along. You've got 2 wrappers. Now, these wrappers have a number on them. So this is number 920. And so if you are in a big project that you might run out of thread, make a note that you're using number 920 because it's kind of hard to tell once you've sewn with it. And you can write 920 on here or whatever you want to do. But you can remove these wrappers, okay? And then you're gonna open up your skein, and it's kind of hard to tell sometimes, but you want to get it opened up so that all of the skein is in a loop like this. So I've got one that's not opened up all the way, so do your best to get them all in one big loop, okay? And then from there, oh, I've missed a couple. This is just going to make your life easier. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. I rarely do this and then I regret it, but it's a really good idea to pre-organize your floss when you buy it. So once you have it like this, you can unwrap it like this, and then you can just get your cardboard flap or your little plastic thing that you purchased, and you're going to run one end through there and then wrap it like this. And when you get to the other end, you can tuck it in here. And it's going to stay nice and organized in your embroidery bag, and you're going to be all set. Okay, so I would highly recommend doing that before we get started next week with your flosses. If you don't want to, totally up to you.
Why don't they make it so it's easier for us?
Yeah. So I mean, I would imagine that it's just more expensive on
Oh yeah, yeah.
the machinery, you know.
Yeah.
So they do make these, which I was like, ooh, look at these. Because on this kind, you pull the wrapper off, you open it up, and you hook one end of your big loop over each end. And I was like, amazing, so much less work. The thread falls off of these. They're horrible. So I did want to warn you, do not be fooled by this in the store. It's not great. Um, so don't
Would
go
you
for that
recommend
one.
writing the number of the embroidery thread on the cardboard?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, that way
I
you remember.
these I always lose. So yeah, I would recommend just with a Sharpie, just writing the number on and then you're good to go.
Got
Um, if you're going to be doing small projects, it's like you may not run out of thread, you may not care, but if you're doing a bigger project, highly recommend keeping track of those colors.
it.
Um, so that is how you wrap your thread. Now, what I do want to show you, and we will be doing some embroidery tonight. So if you want to like take the wrappers off one of your colors tonight, and just sort of get it in that loop, you can, because you will need an arm's length. This is the next thing I want to talk about is embroidery ergonomics. So when you have your floss all organized, you want to pull off, you want to start sewing. What you're going to do is you're going to grab it by the end and you're going to measure from the tip of your finger to your shoulder. That's really as long as you want to go, right? And you can go maybe a few inches longer. Um, but you don't want to use a tiny, if you only have a tiny bit to sew, you don't want a teeny bit of thread because it's very hard and you need a little extra for your tail, but you don't want to go any longer this because otherwise you're going to be sewing like this with your arm. It's really hard on your body. You don't want to do that. So, you don't need to cut yours yet. We're not getting to that yet, but so always arm's length. Don't worry about it. It's better just to finish off, knot off your thread and get a new one if you run out of the color that you're using than to be using a long one that's going to be hard on your body over time. So I'm going to go ahead and cut myself arm's length plus a few inches. Okay. I'm going to cut that off. Now, the next thing to know about embroidery floss is that it's not just one thread, it's actually 6 threads and they're wound together. So this is really great because it gives you a lot of options. If you want to use all 6 threads for your project, it's going to be like drawing with a Sharpie marker. If you want a thinner line, like drawing with a ballpoint pen, you can split your threads and use anywhere from 1 to 6. If you want to do 3 to 3, you can get your embroidery to go twice as far with your floss. I often just use 6 because I like a big bold line. But it's up to you. So I'm going to show you how to split your floss. So I don't know if I'm going to use my forehead as a backdrop here. So you can see all of these. Let me get these split where I can see them. Okay. You can see how many threads that is. So let's say I want to split 3 and 3. Okay. So I've got 3 and 3. Now, again, the instinct is to just pull these apart. It's gonna, if you're using a whole arm's length, it's gonna tangle at the bottom. So this is like sort of a two-handed job here. I pinch 2 between my fingers here, or I'm sorry, 3 threads here and 3 threads here. And again, you could split this into 2, 2, and 2, 1 and 5, whatever you want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist, hold these, and then untwist down here with my other hand. And then I'm just going to keep moving down, untwist. And you could have another cardboard piece going to put your split pieces on, the other half that you're not using right away. So again, a little more time consuming than just giving it a pull, but in the long run, it'll be better. So now I have 2 threads to use, 3 and 3. Okay. So that twisting motion is really helpful for this. All right. So that's that. Anybody have any questions so far? Good. Okay, great. The next thing that I want to talk about is your hoop. So everybody has a bamboo hoop in their kit. There's all kinds of hoops. There's plastic hoops, there's gigantic hoops. They're all different sizes. Bamboo is going to be the most traditional, the most easy to find, and by far the most affordable. I just found out about these hoops last year and I really like them. You can buy them in a 3-pack on Amazon. They're like really easy to load and they hold the fabric quite tight. So if you decide that embroidery is your one true love and you want to invest in some stuff, these are nice hoops. So what you have is this bamboo hoop. What you also have in your kit is about 85 inches of cotton twill tape. Okay. This is, you can just buy this at the store in a package. I bought it on a big spool. Some of you have, if you don't have like a big pile in your kit, it came in like sort of a skein. A few of you had that because I ran out of stuff on the spool. So what I'm going to do with this, and I would like for you to do this after class on your own time, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap my inner hoop in this twill tape. This is not necessary, but I like to do it because it makes my fabric stay more taut in my hoop. And for our third project, which we'll be doing on class number 4 in April, with the tulle, the tutu fabric, it's real slippery. So you will want to have your hoop wrapped by April. So you don't have to do it for next week. Okay. But here's how your hoop works. So it's 2 pieces and you've got a little screw up here. And when you loosen the screw, the inner hoop pops out. Okay. And then you put it in here. I'm going to show you how to load your fabric in a bit because we will be sewing. And you tighten this and then it stays in one piece. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you real quick. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, how to wrap that inner hoop with the twill tape. So again, I told you everybody has about 85 inches. You're only going to have like maybe 4 inches of extra because I was being really conservative. So what you want to do on your own time again is you're going to start your hoop and I'm going to pinch this here. I'm going to leave a little bit sticking out and I'm going to wrap this twill tape really tightly around this inner hoop. You have to pull the whole thing through every time. So the key is you want it to be really, really tight. Okay, and I'm only wrapping, let me get my finger out of the way, having a little bit of overlap. You all see that? I know it's kind of bright. I'm going to switch, pardon me for a moment. I'm going to switch cameras here. I think this will be easier. All right, you got my hands now? Okay. Cool. All right, that's better. So you're just going to wrap this all the way around the whole thing. Okay. You're going to go all the way around. And then when you get around to the other side, here's one that's already done. I don't know. You can see here, it's hard to tell because I used the same color thread. If you can see. I did a 2 or 3 overlaps and then I just use a single strand of thread. So you can either split one thread off your embroidery floss, or if you have a sewing kit stashed away, you can use regular thread and you're just going to tightly connect this so that that inner one is fully wrapped. You could, if you want to get it started, if you're having trouble keeping it tight, you could put a dot of hot glue or super glue. Just make sure if you do use glue that you put it on the inside of the hoop because you don't want to make a bump that will prevent your outer hoop from connecting. Okay, so again, this is going to be really helpful for our final project. So no rush on this, although I do find it helpful and I personally wrap all of my hoops no matter what. I do find it to be a useful thing. Okay. Everybody good so far? Okay. Fantastic. All right. So why don't you all go ahead and get your hoop out and get out a piece of fabric. Okay. Oh, so I'm holding this up and you can't see it. So this is in your kit, you have a couple of different types of fabric. You've got this muslin, which was sort of a cream colored fabric. And then and there's a couple squares of that. And then you have a thicker fabric here that's more like sort of canvasy and it's a brighter white. This is going to be for our second project. So make sure you're not using that thicker piece tonight. Okay, grab one of those thin ones. This is called muslin. And this is going to be, one of these is for project 1 next week, and one of these big squares is your practice piece for the whole series. If you decide that you want more practice pieces or whatever, you can go to Joanne. There's a whole section of fabric that's all muslin. It's going to be in its own section. So if you do go for that, ask one of the employees where it is, because it's not with the regular like patterned fabric and stuff. But it's great, really affordable, and it's always you can get it in colors, but it's usually going to be white or cream colored. So it's a great practice fabric. So now I want you all to do this with me. We're going to load your fabric onto your hoop, and I'm going to use a regular hoop that's not wrapped, so that's what you've got tonight. So you're going to loosen this screw, okay? And you've got your inner hoop here, which is the one that does not have the screw. And you're going to lay your fabric over the hoop. And if you are using a really big piece of fabric, if you're making a big project or you just have a big piece of fabric, this doesn't have to be centered. You can put it over here. And as you're working, you can do some embroidery, and then you can take the hoop off and move it to get to different spots on your fabric. But because this piece of fabric is cut to be just a couple of inches bigger than your hoop, center it as best you can. You're going to take the big one, and it's loosened so I can open up the hoop here, and you're going to put it over the small one, over the fabric, and push. Okay, super simple. And then you're going to tighten the screw down. Okay, so if you can get if there's a lot of give on your fabric, what you can do is you can sort of pull a little bit around the edges to get this a little more taut. Now, it's hard to see here, but you can see the grain of the fabric here. If you pull this so tight that those grain lines start to get all wonky, you've pulled it too tight. You still want them to be like a fairly even grid with 90-degree angles. So what you want is you want your fabric to be taut but not super tight, and you don't want it to, be able to be loose enough to wrinkle. So taut like a drum. Once you get like that, you can really tighten it down. Okay, so that's what you need to sew. And you're always going to do that there are times when you can embroider without a hoop, but the projects that we're going to be doing are pretty hoop heavy. All right. So go ahead and get set up for that. I'll give you a minute. And you're also going to want to grab some thread. And why don't you go ahead and do what I mentioned before and cut yourself an arm's length piece of thread, any piece that you want. It doesn't matter for this because we're just practicing. If you want to try splitting it 3 and 3, just so that you aren't wasting thread on practice, that's fine. And then grab your needles. So in your kit, you've got a little piece of felt that has 2 needles and some pins in it. What those needles are chenille needles, okay, which is this word here, Chenille. Chenille needles are my favorite to embroider with. They have a really big eye, but they're still really, really pointy, so they can really penetrate your fabric easily. You have in your kit, if you look closely, you'll see that one of them has a bigger eye than the other. So you have a number 20 and a number 22. The bigger the number gets, the smaller the eye gets, counterintuitively. So you've got a 20 and a 22. And I just want to show you the difference here. These are embroidery needles, they're actually labeled for embroidery. I do not like embroidering with embroidery needles. I don't know if these are for like when you're doing really fine work with maybe one or two threads, or maybe they're good for cross stitch or something. I don't actually know. I don't cross stitch, but I'm gonna pull one of these out so you can see the difference. Um, so there's an embroidery needle, and here's the chenille needle. Okay. Even when I didn't need reading glasses, it was really hard for me to thread an embroidery needle. So anyway, I gave you chenille needles. Again, if you get really into this, feel free to experiment with supplies. You may find that you really prefer the embroidery needles, but you will need to split your threads to sew with that. So go ahead and grab yourself one of those needles. It doesn't matter if you're going to use the 20 or the 22. And you're going to grab your arm's length piece of thread, and then you're also going to grab, if you purchased one of these marking pens on your own, sometimes they're just purple, sometimes they're purple and blue. If you did not purchase one of these, you do not need it. It's all good. Grab yourself a pencil or even a pen tonight for your practice. It really doesn't matter. So for these, the purple one, this one says air and water soluble ink. For it's just got the one end. This is my favorite one. The water soluble ink is here in blue. You can draw on your fabric. It'll stay there forever until you wash it off with water. The air soluble, depending on the type of fabric, might last, your ink marks might last 10 minutes or they might last 10 weeks. But you can hit them with a blow dryer or use water if it doesn't disappear on its own to get rid of that. So these are really, really handy. One of the things in your kit is a piece of carbon paper and a stylus, this little metal thing with like a ball on the end. We're going to play around with that for pattern transfer for this series. The only thing about that stuff is that it's hard to get it off of your fabric, whereas this, when you're done with it, whoop, you just get rid of it. So when you use that carbon paper, you just want to make sure that you're covering up all of those lines with stitching. Okay, so
Bree, what is this pen called?
yeah, so this one, its brand name is Mark Be Gone. But if you look up just like a fabric disappearing ink pen, it should come up. This one I think is Dritz brand, which you can find at Joann's or on Amazon. It's DRITZ. But again, if you can only find just the purple one, that's fine too. If you live, if you live in this area, you can just go buy a pack of one of these at the Joann's in Walpole or Norwood, whatever that is on Route 1.
Yeah, Joanne Fabrics now calls it something different, but it's the same product.
Oh yeah, you
And
told me that. You emailed me
yeah,
that, I think.
just ask them and they'll show you where to get them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, these are amazing. Thanks, Christian.
No problem.
Okay, so all right, let's get your arm's length of fabric. I'm sorry, your arm's length of thread and one of your needles. And if you've got really good eyes, this might not be a problem. But again, remember that you've got 6 threads here. Okay, so it's hard to just like shove 6 threads through this thing. So what I do, and you've probably seen your grandma do it, is you're gonna lick the end of your thread. You can't see me licking the end of my thread, but I'm doing that. Just the end. Okay. And then what you can do is it's a little bit wet. Now, if that grosses you out, totally understand because it's gross. You can get like a little water and just wet your fingers or dip it in a little cup of water. But you know what's always handy? My mouth. So you're going to wet it and then you're going to pinch it. And what that does is that takes your threads from being like this to being like this, like all in a row. And these chenille needles have this nice big eye. Now, the other thing, this is how cartoon characters thread sewing needles. They push the thread through the eye of the needle, which doesn't really work. So what I want you to do is do the little licky and do the little flattening thing. And then I want you to put the thread in between your thumb and your forefinger so that there's just a tiny bit sticking out. And instead of putting the thread through the eye of the needle, you're going to put the eye of the needle over the thread. Okay. Takes a little practice, but it goes right through, especially when you have these bigger eyes on your needle. If you're trying to do that and it's not really working, you can try using your super sharp scissors and giving the ends of the thread another snip so it's nice and clean. Oh, I'm going to show you all, since I said scissors. I had mentioned that if you wanted to invest in some embroidery scissors, I linked to some little metal ones that are like a little gold stork. Those are fun. They're great. They're traditional. My mother-in-law got me these little singer ones that are like really nice. And she made me a sewing kit, and I keep these scissors in an Altoid box, so I'm always ready to sew. So yeah, those little tiny scissors are going to be really handy for cutting thread, but also for doing some really detailed cutting work, which you may or not need to do. All right. Did everybody get their thread through their needle? Just yell at me if you didn't. Okay, fantastic. All right, so you've got a needle, you've got an arm's length worth of thread. What you're going to do, I know I've talked to some of you who learn to sew by doubling your thread, right? You learn to sew with 2 threads and you tie a knot in the end of both. Don't do it. It's nice because you get a big thick line of thread, but if you make a mistake, you're in big trouble because there's no way to undo what you've done without cutting your thread. So what I want you to do instead is to have half of your thread be short, all right? So this is like half the length of my entire thread here, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a knot in the end of the long one. So the short one I'm going to refer to as the tail. Okay. And it should be about half the length of the long thread. There are people who I really admire who have they can twist the thread and make a knot. My grandma could do it. I've met people who could do it. I have not figured that out. So the old-fashioned way, I make a loop and push it through and I get a knot. For this muslin fabric, a single knot should be completely sufficient, especially if you're using all 6 threads. If you're using a fabric that has sort of a wider weave, or you're only using 1 thread, you might need to tie a double knot. That's fine. Again, that knot is going to go in the long one. And for this class, we're always going to be sewing with a single thread with a knot in the long end. Okay. All right, I'm gonna give you all a second to do that, and then we're gonna start doing some embroidery. Happen. Bradley, you made me laugh. Does anybody have any questions before we start sewing? Great. Jump in if you think of it. Okay, again, this is going to be your practice fabric that we're going to be using for the whole session. Just try to use up your fabric. Don't worry, we're not making any kind of pretty composition here. We're just practicing our stitches. You don't want to sew really close to the edge of your hoop. It gets in the way. Within a 1/4 inch of the edge of that inner hoop, it's prime sewing area. So wherever you want to do it. I am gonna work sort of in the middle so you can really see what I'm doing, but you just keep in mind that you'll be using this fabric the whole time. So grab your pencil or your disappearing ink pen, and I want you to just make a line that's has a gentle curve. And we're going to start with what's called the running stitch. And if you've ever sewed anything ever, you know how to do the running stitch because it's just sewing. It's just up and down and up and down and up and down. So, all right. What we're going to do is we're going to start on the bottom of our fabric, and I'm going to find the edge of my line. A good way to sort of, I don't know if you all can see this on the camera, I can kind of drag my needle to find the edge. The more you embroider, the easier it'll be to find where you want to be. But I'm going to come up right on the end of my line that I just drew, and I'm going to pull this through. Now, we've got a pretty long tail that we're working with right now, so this isn't a big deal. It's not going to pull through our needle, but I hold my needle like this. So I'm kind of pinching the thread where it comes out as I pull through. Sometimes if you just pull on your needle, if you pull too hard, you can unthread it, which isn't the end of the world, but it's just easier if you don't have to unthread your needle. So when I get started, always, 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 I've pulled through here, flip this over and just check that your knot is flush against the edge of your fabric. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that feels flush, and I turn it over and it's actually hanging loose here. So you just want it against the edge of the fabric. Okay. Now, I am right-handed. So I'm going to hold the hoop in my left hand and my needle in my right hand. Some people, there's different stitches that you need to go a certain direction. I am usually comfortable going from right to left, or sometimes I'm comfortable sewing away from myself. Okay, so you can play around with all of these and see what feels good to you. For this one, I'm going to hold it and sew sideways. Okay, so running stitch, up and down is just sewing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the line that I drew, and I'm going to go back down through the fabric. Now, the length of stitch that I choose has a really clever name. It's called your stitch length. Okay, that's the length of the stitch that you can see. It can be whatever you want. It can be really long, it can be really short, depending on what you're working on. You may like the aesthetics of doing it one way or the other. If you're doing a curved line like we are right now, smaller stitches are gonna look better. Big stitches are gonna sort of look pixelated, like you're turning big corners. So you can see it next to my finger. I'm gonna stick with that stitch length, okay? I'm just picking it, and that's what I'm gonna stick with. So I'm gonna pull this back through. And for the first couple of stitches, I'm always gonna flip it over and make sure that my knot is still against the edge of the thread. Another thing that's easy to do is that this edge of your fabric can get like turned under, and then you sew the fabric to itself, and you've sewn the fabric around your hoop. So just every once in a while, turn this over and see what's going on. All right, so there's my stitch length. For my second stitch, I'm just gonna come up on my line. I'm gonna go back down on my line. Up and down, just sewing. Let me check that out. Looks good. Okay. So do a few of those, and then I'm going to show you, a lot of stitches have what I call the pro move, which is a way to do the stitch. Usually the pro move, just you go a little faster. So here's 3, and it's good practice that the stitch length is the same length that I'm keeping in between my stitches. It just looks nicer, and it's also good to sort of practice that muscle memory, getting the stitch length for the stitch itself and the space between the stitches. All right, so I'm going to come up. Why don't everybody get to a place where you're coming up through the fabric? Your needle is on top of the fabric. And I'm going to show you that pro move. So for the running stitch, the pro move is, and it's sometimes a little harder to keep your stitch length consistent, but what you're going to do is you're going to go down, and you're really focusing on that line you drew. You're going to go down with the end of your needle. You're going to come back up with your needle. And I can do this on a curve as long as my needle tip is penetrating on the line that I drew. Okay. and back up. So you can see how many times I've gone through the fabric here. And then I can just push that through and pull it through. And then I got a few stitches all in one. Okay. So what everybody try the pro move and then go back down through the fabric once so that your needle is on the back. I'm going to show you how to knot off when you're done with your line of stitching, or if you're not done with your line of stitching but you've run out of thread. So I could just keep going. Let's say I want to move to a different spot on my fabric. Let's say my next line of stitching starts over here. I could just jump over here and go for it. There's a couple of problems with that. One, I'm using this light colored fabric and you can't really tell on the camera, but I can sort of see it through because I'm using a dark thread. But the real problem, and honestly, I don't care what the back of my stuff looks like. It's the back. Nobody's going to see it. It's often completely hidden, sewn inside something. But if you've got all these big, huge, we'll call this a stitch, right? If you've got a 2.5-inch stitch on the back of your piece, you're going to get stuck in it later. So I always recommend, just for think about future you, knot off when you're done with the line of stitching. So what you're going to do is you're going to find your closest stitch. And again, we're on the back, right? Here's my knot. I'm on the back. I'm going to put my needle under the closest stitch. I'm not penetrating the fabric. I'm just going under that line of stitching. And then I'm going to go through the hoop, through the loop. And then I'm going to pull gently. You don't want to pull tight so that it wrinkles your fabric. But if I pull over to where my needle came out, I've just tied a knot. That's it. Sometimes I get nervous and I do it twice. And then you can trim that off. Sometimes I'm running out of thread and I don't really have enough thread on the back to do that knot off trick where I run my needle through the loop. So what you can do is you can just remove your needle and you can split your threads back here. This is a fun trick. You can just split your threads and just tie it in a knot like you're tying your shoe. That's another option. Everybody with me? Okay. All right, so we're gonna now move into the back stitch. And so for that, I want you to go ahead and tie a knot in the long end of your thread again. Okay, and again, so I don't know if you can tell, but the tail of my thread has gotten it's like 2/3 the length of my thread now. So I'm just gonna tug on the long one and shorten my tail because I really want it to be about half the length of my sewing thread. Okay. No, if you're all using purple pens, it might be because the air is so dry, but my purple line is already starting to disappear on my fabric here because I'm using the air soluble one. The blue one is going to be water soluble. You have to wet it to get rid of it. So I'm going to try the blue one here. And I'm going to do just a similar line. Again, a gentle curve. I think it's good to learn on a curve. The running stitch gave us a dotted line. The back stitch is going to give us a solid line. So FYI, I will be emailing out tomorrow this video, or at least a link to this video, which will be on YouTube, as well as a PDF that is going to have instructions for these stitches. Okay, so if you feel like, oh my gosh, I should have taken notes, I'm sending stuff tomorrow. The back stitch is still quite simple, but it starts out with a couple of different steps. So what we're going to do, same thing we did before. I'm also going to go from right to left with my back stitch. I'm going to come up on the end of my line. I'm going to turn this over, check my knot, looks good. All right, so for the back stitch, I'm going to go forward one stitch, just like I did before. One stitch length, down, penetrate my fabric to the back. Oops. I'm gonna check that. Looks good. Okay. Next thing I'm gonna do, just like the running stitch, is I'm gonna come up on my line forward 1 stitch length. From here, it becomes the back stitch. From here, I'm sewing backwards. So I'm gonna go back to where my first stitch ended, okay? And I'm gonna go in right next to it. Now, depending on the type of fabric you're using, the type of thread, you can sometimes go in right in the same place. It's always safe just to go in right next to it. So anyway, right next to it or in the same hole that the other one ended, I am now sewing backwards. So I came up 1 stitch length forward. I'm going in right next to where my first stitch ended. Okay, so those are so close. They almost look like 1 stitch. I'm going to check the back. Looks good. All right, now I'm going to come up on my line again, 1 stitch length. So from here, it just repeats. You're going to come forward 1 stitch length on top, which is actually 2 stitch lengths on the bottom, but don't worry about that. And then I'm going to go back down. Forward 1. Just coming up and down on that line I drew. So you can pro move on this one. I actually have to turn this. Well, yeah. You could try coming up and going back down, but I think that for the back stitch, it's just easier to do it the old-fashioned way and just come up, pull your thread nice and taut before you go back down. You risk snagging in your previous stitches, so no pro move for this one, we'll say. So just practice that one the length of your line. So my fabric is starting to get a little loosey-goosey over here, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of a tug here along the edges of my hoop and retighten. Once you have your inner hoop wrapped, there's a lot less slippage. I've got 1 more stitch on my line. So if you want to watch me do that knot off technique again, go ahead and look up from what you're doing and I'll show you that. So for my last stitch, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to flip this over. Now, this is actually a little easier when you're like right by your closest stitch as opposed to having a gap. You're going to get a more secure knot. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to slip, again, my needle underneath my closest stitch, not penetrating the fabric. Okay. And I've got my little loop here. I'm just going to bloop, go back through the loop and pull that tight. When it's really close like that, I feel much more comfortable just doing it once and not doing a double knot. Okay. So we're cruising. I didn't think this class would take the whole time, and we're very ahead of schedule. So I'm going to show you a really fun. We're going to do one more stitch after this, but I'm going to show you a really fun decorative technique that adds a lot of visual interest to these simple line stitches. It's called one of them is called whipping the stitch, and one of them is called weaving the stitch. So if you want to do this along with me, I'm gonna use a secondary color because that's part of the fun. So you can take a minute and grab another piece of thread from your kit in a different color. And we're just going to do a little bit here. You don't need to grab a whole arm's length. You don't have to waste it. You just do like, let's say fingertip to like mid bicep or even elbow if you've got nice long arms. I'm going to do this lavender. So go ahead and if you want to do that with me, load up your needle with the second color. I'll give you a minute. No rush. Again, I'll do this again. Gave my thread a little lick there, and I'm squeezing this so that those 6 threads are nice and tight, and then I'm moving my needle over the thread. And even though I'm working with this little one, I'm going to have that tail half the length and tie a knot in the second one. Those of you that have your cameras on, give me a thumbs up when you're loaded up and ready. It's like some of you are still threading. Okay, good. We'll give it another minute.
Are we splitting these?
It's totally up to you. This one is just for like decorative effect to add a pop of color. So usually when I do this on a piece, I leave it all 6 to get so I can really see it. But if you want to
Okay.
split it to save thread since we're just practicing, that's totally fine.
Okay.
Either
Thank
way.
Okay.
Thanks, Riley.
Hey Bree,
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, I accidentally stuck my needle through my thread when I did a couple of my back stitches,
Yeah.
and then it ended up like making a weird kind of snag. Is there an easy way to avoid doing that?
So did it like split the threads when you went back through?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would just be a matter of maybe going back through a little bit further, like a micro bit further away from your previous
Okay.
stitch. Yeah. So we're actually next week we're going to be doing a stitch called the split stitch. We are purposely going to do that.
Gotcha.
But yeah, when you do it on accident, it's kind of a bummer. So that's sort of the best thing to do if it's, made an eyesore is to take your needle off the thread and sort of pick it out.
Okay.
You
All
should be
right,
able to
cool.
do. Yeah. Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
go in a little further. Thanks, Christy. All
Fabri,
right.
I have a question also.
Yeah.
So, in doing this back stitch, like there are almost like little holes in between my stitches. Is that because I pulled too hard?
So that could be just that you're not quite going back in close enough. Um, do you have your camera on?
Yeah,
Do you mind turning on your camera and then holding your,
sure.
let's see if I can find you here. Oh, I see you. Perfect. Thank you. Do you mind if I spotlight your camera for everyone so everyone can see?
Sure.
Thank you. Is that on the back or the front?
This is the front
That's
that
the
I'm
front.
showing right now. Yeah, like if you see here, like
Yeah.
there are little holes. Yeah.
So I think that you are actually splitting your thread. It's hard for me to tell with the light colored thread, but you might be going, are you overlapping when you go back in? Are you overlapping the stitch?
I'm actually going back in like the same spot. Let me see
I
how
think I
you
can
could
see
see
it
this
better.
better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me,
Hang on. Maybe this is better. If I did this. Is that worse?
gosh, I think it's just, oh, what? Oh, you know what? Yep, I can see now. Thank you. Yeah, you're correct. You're just not pulling those threads tight enough as you go through. So just pull each stitch a little more taut so it's flush with the surface of the fabric.
Okay, I thought I was pulling too tight.
No, I don't
but-
think so. From what I can't, I can't see it perfectly, but I think that that's what's happening. Try another row and see what happens.
Okay.
Thank you so much for asking that. Just so you all know, all of these questions help everyone because who knows if someone else is having the exact same issue at their house, right?
Then I have a question if it might be helpful.
Okay, sure.
I think that I have the same problem that she just had, and I
Yep.
did it. Can I show you mine?
Yeah. Is this
Let's
Jess?
see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And where am I?
I have your profile picture only. I don't think your camera's on. Is that right?
Okay.
Start video. There it is. All right. And Jess, I'm going to spotlight you.
Okay, so I can't wait. No, where am I?
All right. Let's see, back up. We're just a little out of focus there.
Let's see. And I'll go slowly in.
Do you have are you blurring your background by any chance? Yes.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
blur your background? Haha, try that. Okay.
Oh.
That
The bottom.
Yep. So the ones that are sort of on the further to the left, I think they're just a little bit loose.
So this one I went through, like instead of going in front, I went back, and I think that's what you're calling is splitting.
Yep.
And then this one I didn't, I just went right next to it. But like she said, there's holes, like you could see the.
Yeah. So I think if you can find find the middle thing between those two things.
Oh, okay. So you're
Yeah.
really one tiny little, Egyptian
Yeah. So
Eve thing.
let me, I'm going to put my camera back on and show you all. I'm going to do this a little bit again and just maybe see if I can find some subtleties here to what I'm doing. Do y'all have my hoop back on your screens? Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'm just gonna jump up here real quick. All right. So I'm just going to go forward one stitch on top. Check, looks good. All right, so I'm going to do my first back stitch here. Now, what you can do, you won't believe this, but it really does make a difference if you like put your needle in like straight in like this, or if you go in at an angle. So if I turn this away from myself and sort of go in almost at an angle here, so I'm sort of like slipping it in underneath the end of that stitch. I don't know if y'all can see that. So it's like I'm so close to it, but not touching it. But if I sort of go in at an angle, if this is my stitch, I can sort of slip my needle in under it and penetrate the fabric almost underneath the edge. And just like visually, it's going to look so close. So I've got like one little bit of fabric in. So the other thing with this is it's going to depend what kind of fabric you're using. Like we're using this sort of, it's not cheap, but it's not thick, right? It's like this thin sort of open weave fabric. So it's kind of harder because if you go too close, you could rip a hole. So just play around with it. But I think that what you're going to find as you learn to embroider that is that tension affects your stitches quite a bit. And so some of them you're going to need to pull harder and some of them leave a little bit looser. So I'll try to keep that in mind as we go over these to sort of think about what it should be. So I'm going to do this again. And if you can feel, like I can feel when I push my needle in, that's just the fabric. And when I push here, there's a little more resistance because I'm going through the thread. So aim for, I would say for this, for functionality, you would rather have a tiny gap between your stitches than to split them. Okay, think about that.
Rhea, I was wondering how to avoid getting the thread on the back side when you're doing that back stitch.
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
I was splitting the thread on the back.
That is just actually, you know, what's so funny is that this is actually kind of, if you do it in reverse, it's actually the back stitch. So just next week, we're going to flip the script and do it on purpose, and it's going to look like the back here.
So it's fine if that happens on the back?
Yes, excellent question.
All right,
you
cool.
are 100% splitting the threads on the back.
All right, awesome.
Yep. Great question. All right. Okay, y'all. Thank you for your questions. I really do appreciate it. It helps everyone. Okay, I'm going to re-knot this and I'm going to jump into that earlier technique that I mentioned. So if you're doing this along with me, go ahead and we're going to do it on our back stitch or your running stitch. Actually, I'm going to do it on my running stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up at the end of my running stitch line with this contrasting thread. And what we're going to start with is called whipping. I'm going to whip the stitch. And what I'm going to do for this, just like when we knot off, I've penetrated the fabric once. I've got my knot here. I've checked that it's taut. I am now going to slip my needle under my stitches without going through the fabric. So just like when we did our knot. But what I'm going to do is instead of going through with the pointy end of my needle, because I'm going to be doing this over and over, I'm going to flip my needle around and I'm going to slip this through eye first. What that does is it keeps you from accidentally splitting those threads or accidentally penetrating the fabric. A lot of people will actually switch to a blunt needle to do this, but you've got a blunt needle here if you go eye first. So for this whip stitch, I'm starting on the right side of my stitch and going under to the left. Doesn't matter as long as you're consistent. So right to left, underneath. Now for my second stitch, I'm going to also go under the stitch, right to left, right under that with the eye of the needle. Right to left. So I'm now giving myself a nice solid line of stitching. And I'm adding an extra layer of color. It's like kind of like a little barber pole. You can really get crazy with this and you can leave these little loop-de-doops loose. If you want some like height. Okay, obviously this is not a good move if you're putting it on clothing or something that's going to get washed or get snagged, but you can add some three-dimensionality to this. If it's going to be a wall hanging, you can pull it tight. Okay, and then when you're done, you've gone as far as you want to go with that, you're going to turn your needle back around and just go back down through the fabric. Okay. And knot off. I'll do that again. Slipping underneath my closest stitch and going through the loop. All right, so that was whipping. So with whipping, you're always starting on, in this case, the right side of the stitch going to the left, right under left, right under left, right under left. Okay, that's the whip, the barber pole effect. Now, you can also do the woven effect. And with a woven effect, you're going to go back and forth. Right to left, left to right, right to left, left to right. Sometimes you'll see that called the laced effect as well. I'm going to do that real quick. And the fun thing about these effects is you can do it on just about any line stitch. You can add this extra layer of color. Or you could do it in the same color right? And make your running stitch look like a back stitch, and just thicken it up that way. But here I'm going to go ahead and do a real quick demo of the woven effect. So I'm coming up, check my knot, looks good. I'm going to turn this around, so I'm going through with my eye first, and I'm going to go start on the right and go under to the left. Now, instead of crossing over and going back under the same way, I'm just going to, just like weaving, alternate sides. And this one, again, you can leave it loose. You got to be real careful if you want to leave it loose, because if I'm trying to leave it loose and then I slip, I can just like, whoops, pull it all tight. So if you are trying to leave it loose, let's loosen this up again. Say I'm leaving it loose. Every few stitches, if I don't want to accidentally tighten that up, you can do what's called a lock stitch. And to do that, I'm just going to, I want to lock this line of stitching in place and not accidentally pull it tight. So I'm just going to penetrate the fabric very carefully. Okay. And I'm going to put my finger on top here to hold it in place. Again, you want to be very gentle here, because if I pull too hard, I'm gonna tighten those stitches. Okay, these are now locked in place. I can't mess these up. So what I can now do, I did that, I knotted off, but I'm not going to cut it. I'm just going to come back up to start the next one. So I'm going to come up where it would have come out, being sneaky. And you'll notice here that because I started with a short thread, my tail is now about the same length as my thread. So I just want to keep an eye on that. I'm going to shorten it up. I don't want to accidentally start sewing with the double thread. And again, I'm going to go under one way, under the next. So again, this is the woven effect. And I can also do it tight if I want to. Okay, so that's a fun one. And in our first project, we're going to be doing all line stitches. And I highly recommend taking the time to add some of these effects to it for funsies. Okay, so go ahead and practice that for a minute or two, and then I'm going to show you one last stitch tonight. It's called a French knot. French knots are so fun, and they make a beautiful little delicate tiny knot on top of your fabric, a raised knot. They're tricky. So I'm going to go over them tonight, and I'm going to go over them again in class 1, and then I'll probably go over them again in class 2, just because it takes a little bit to master. So we're just going to get started on some French knot muscle memory. And I'm going to do one more knotting off on the back demo here. So my little tail is so short, got stuck in there. Slip under, oops, went too far. And then go through, oops, I'm off camera. And this is what I was saying, if your needle's too close and this is where it's getting kind of hard to tie a knot, you can just do this cheat move, get rid of your needle. Do a quick split of your threads. See what I just did there? How I just pulled on them and now they're all stuck. Do as I say and not as I do. Okay, so I can just split them and then I'm just going to tie a knot like I'm tying my shoe. And then turn it up. All right. Take a minute and go ahead and grab, if you need more thread, a French knot is kind of finicky and you need a little extra thread to work with. So go ahead and cut a length of thread. We're not gonna, it does not use a lot of thread, but you need a lot of thread. So go ahead and cut, let's do another like fingertip to mid bicep length thread for practice. Or again, if you had split, you can just use whatever you've got laying there that's left. So while everyone's getting their threads loaded up again for the French knot, this is going to be the last thing that we go over tonight. So we'll end early, but next week we'll start at 6:45 and we'll take the whole time. Bring everything in your kit. We're going to be working with the other piece of full-size muslin, and there's also a piece of cheesecloth in there. So just have those ironed for next time and bring everything else. And there's also a piece of paper in your kit that has some patterns on it. We are going to be, mine's cut up, but you've got one of these with 4 different patterns in it. We're going to be making a pin cushion using a traditional Italian technique called trapunto, where you stuff enclosed spaces. So come to class, have taken a peek at this pattern and picked out the one you want. I also left you a blank. If you want to design your own, you can absolutely do that. The key elements are that you want to have sort of some enclosed spaces. So on the heart, you've got the center, the 3 enclosed heart spaces. This one, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 stripes, and then the outline, and then this big section. There's one that's a little bit more complicated. It's like a little flower. That's the one that I did for my example. A lot of options for that stuffing technique, which I think is really fun to do. So anyway, just think about it. If you want to design your own, make sure you include some enclosed spaces. All right, let's go ahead and French knot. Just my view here. Okay. All right, you do not need to draw anything on your hoop for French knots. We're just going to make a few little dots for this. So I've got my thread, I've got a knot. I'm going to come up over here. Now this is tricky, so if it doesn't work the first time, don't worry about it. I'm going to pull my thread through. I'm going to check I'm in a good position on the back. Okay. Now, let me see if I can zoom in here. Okay. I'm going to hold my needle in my right hand because I'm right-handed. And I'm going to hold the thread that is coming out of the fabric with my left hand. And I'm giving myself about 1.5 or 2 inches where I'm pinching it from the surface of the fabric. Now, I'm holding my needle parallel to the fabric. And I'm going to wrap this thread. I wrap it away from myself 1, 2 times. Once you get this down, you can wrap it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. The more wraps you do, it gets a little trickier. So let's start with 2 wraps. Okay, I'm going to do that again. Here's my needle, parallel to the surface of the fabric. Wrap once, wrap twice. Okay, I'm holding this tight, right? This is taut, this length. Now, I am going to put my needle back. This is sort of like the back stitch, right? You do not, for this one, you do not want to go in the same hole that you came out of. You want to go back in close to it, but not in the same hole. I'm still tugging this tight. My needle is penetrating the fabric. I'm pushing my needle through the fabric. Now, and I'm still pulling. Once the eye of my needle is sort of embedded in those wraps, I can let go. Okay. And then I'm going to reach to the back and pull my needle through slowly. You can see I get this adorable little raised knot on top of the fabric. It's like a little rosebud. Okay. I'm going to do this several more times. These are really great for just making dots, for making polka dots. We are going to be doing a project that is based on floral stitches, and the French knot features heavily in floral stitches. So it's just something to master. If you get into embroidery, it's going to show up a lot in patterns and stuff. So I'm coming up and I'm just jumping over. I don't have to knot this off on the bottom. Okay, I'm just jumping over a little bit. I'm not worried about it right here. All right. Fabric, needle, words. Thread is coming through the fabric. Left hand is pulling about 1.5 inches or 2 inches away from the surface of the fabric. Needle is parallel to the surface of the fabric. Wrap once, wrap twice. Okay, I'm putting the needle back in the fabric, very close to where it came out. While I'm tugging on this, I'm pushing this through. The eye has reached those wraps, so I can now let go and gently pull this through. Okay. I'm going to do it one more time, and then I'm going to check in with y'all. Up through the fabric. 1, 2, I'm going to do a triple, 3 wraps. Same technique. So my needle is like really close to the edge of the to the fabric, pushing this through. Okay, and my knot, like my wraps, are sitting on top of the fabric, and I'm pushing this through. My eye has reached the wraps. I can go get a cup of tea, whatever. I'm all good here. I am going to make this so that I can see you all. Anybody get it first try? Excellent. Oh, sweet. I love it. That's great. Anybody struggling and have any questions? You're pros. This is so exciting.
I keep getting like loops on the top of mine when I try to make them.
You're getting loops. Okay, Riley, may I spotlight your camera?
Yes.
All right, let me
I
see.
have like
So let's see. I think that it's possible you're loosening your tension before your needle is all the way through. Maybe.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to pull
I've
you.
also been using the wrong fabric until this stitch, so
Oh no, we're using the white one?
I was using the cheesecloth.
Oh God. Well, yep.
No wonder I kept having
Me
holes
too,
in my
you're not the
fabric.
only one.
Oh my gosh, that explains the problem with the backstitch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
so
sorry
where
about
might
that,
one
y'all.
get a replacement cheesecloth?
I can do that. I believe I have extra cheesecloth. Yeah.
I was gonna ask why I kept having holes in my fabric,
I'm
and then you
so
showed the
sorry.
cheesecloth, and I was like, oh.
I should have mentioned that. I forgot about the cheesecloth until I mentioned it a few minutes ago. Oh my gosh. Okay. You'll have much better luck with the muslin. Don't try to do embroidery on cheesecloth. That's not what it's for. All right. Anyone else? Riley, we'll see how you do on that. Anyone else need any consulting on your French knots? No. Okay. Cool. Well, I'm going to stay here if anybody wants to stay on and ask any questions about the French knots or anything we talked about. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I'll see you in a week at 6:45. And we'll jump into like a real project, and we're going to learn some really fun, more interesting stitches. So feel free to email me if you have questions throughout the week. And I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you. You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Really
Thank you.
good.
Thank you,
Yay.
Bree.
You're welcome. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. It was
Thank you,
great.
Bree.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.